Hello, my name is Peter Musket. I'm a senior majoring in National Security Foreign Affairs with minors in Spanish and GIS. And I worked under Dr. Aaron Brantley in the Tech for Humanity lab on the research project Geospatial Artificial Intelligence, Capabilities, Legislation, and Ethical Considerations. So jumping right in, some background is that GeoAI is an evolving field that seeks to combine traditional GIS and spatial science with modern AI. And it's unique in its ability to integrate spatial data, remote sensing, and geospatial intelligence with cutting-edge artificial intelligence to form interdisciplinary tools. There's been a recent growth in GeoAI, and it reflects an overall trend of increased investment, development, and utilization of geospatial data in the public and private sectors, with the industry predicted to grow from its current $239.1 billion value to $502 billion by 2024. As such, this growth in commercial GeoInt serves as a driving force behind the recent rise in geospatial AI that will ultimately restructure much of the current responsibilities and skill sets of both the federal and private geospatial workforce. For this reason, this report seeks to bridge the gap between defense-related and general GeoAI intelligence programs and federal legislation, provide analysis on already existing regulation of geospatial data and AI to determine if gaps exist requiring further attention by policymakers, determine regulation is potentially strongest or most vulnerable to exploitation, provide insight on the mission and desired future of GeoAI currently being built towards, identify the effects GeoAI programs will have on both the workforce utilizing the technology and the populations from which geospatial data is collected, and to consider the effect of GeoAI on the human condition to identify if any potential negative ramifications of the acquisition and implementation of the technology could outweigh the benefits of its development. So I started by looking at 3 federal programs, NRO Sentient, NGA Shipwriter, and US Army SAGE. Sentient is a multi-int R&D effort that seeks to change the traditional tasking, collection, processing, exploitation, and dissemination cycle into a learning and adaptive cycle. And a key component of this is establishing context that can make sense of the past and present to best prepare for the future. GeoAI has a strong role in this through its pairing with different AI systems across various disciplines to work in tandem, build off each other's strengths, and help the analysts make the best decision possible by providing multiple tools at their disposal. NGA Shipwriter is not a software, but a collaborative NGA and Navy mission to train sailors in GeoInt and GeoAI. Historically, GeoInt at sea has been limited by insufficient bandwidth and increased risk of cyber threats. However, through the provision of the NGA outside continental US data center known as the ODC, this allows for naval vessels quick connection to live data, as opposed to the old method of manually connecting to the United States and downloading all the data for analysis. So this reflects an increased access to geospatial data and partnership across the IC and armed forces, alongside the growth of cloud-hosted geospatial data as evidenced by the ODC. And finally, US Army SAGE, which stands for Situational Awareness Geospatially Enabled, is an automated pre-analysis effort that enhances the time efficiency of analysis for the Army. However, sometimes the available imagery is not at the desired resolution. So what ends up happening is you would have to acquire commercial imagery, be it a specialization in synthetic aperture radar or hyperspectral, or just at a higher, more fine resolution to suit the mission. And this reflects an increased usage of commercial GeoInt and a growing push towards market-ready analytic services for geospatial data that automates much of the previously conducted human endeavors in the analysis of the data. Then looking at legislation, I started with the Land Remote Sensing Policy Act of 1992. And it's important to note that in 1992, no private remote sensing companies were in existence, and the US government maintained dominance of remote sensing capabilities. In 2020, however, there are over 250 active licenses across the globe, with many international competitors quickly developing their capabilities. And the 2020 update reflects regulations and encourages growth so that US companies have reduced barriers to compete globally and to enhance US competitiveness. The Geospatial Data Act of 2014 solidifies geospatial data standards and creates bodies such as the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, among others, to regulate the data. However, the Act, is important to note, does not pertain to any DoD or IC institution in any way, and none of the regulations contained therein pertain to any data collected for the mission of national security. And this highlights an important factor to consider, that not all geospatial data is equal, and that regulation varies significantly based on what institution collects the data and what the data is intended to be used for. Finally, the executive order on maintaining American leadership in AI and the AI ethic framework for the intelligence community reflects a desire to keep AI safe, to protect the privacy of citizens, and to guard against biases inherent in artificial intelligence, while at the same time promoting innovation and the growth of AI. The document, while it's only a loose framework, it highlights the inherent struggle between safety and privacy with a desire for progress and increasing capabilities in AI, and will ultimately play a substantial role in determining how federal agencies, particularly within the DoD, go about creating their AI systems in the future. Now, looking how all of these have an effect on the human condition, I felt it necessary to separate between how the rise in GeoAI will affect the geospatial workforce and surveil populations. So looking at the geospatial workforce, 77% of industry leaders believe that nearly all GeoM positions within the next 5 years will have some implementation of human-machine teaming for analysis and decision-making. However, only 33% of leaders polled stated they had a formal strategy for adapting the GeoM workforce to AI. And the way to best combat this, what they were polled is saying, was to first work with universities to create curricula focused on evolving GeoM technology, and two, to invest heavily in K-12 STEM development. Now, the effect on surveil populations is that when you think of things like Google Maps, Google Earth, Apple Maps, Bing Maps, is that this free and publicly available satellite imagery calls into question the private citizens' right to privacy. And even further than this is that the presence of UAVs, particularly in authoritarian states, can erode public trust in government through the perception of constant surveillance. Additionally, data obtained through users' location data services puts them at the risk of de-anonymization attacks and theft if the anonymized geospatial data is not collected and stored properly. The collection and usage of geospatial data can be biased, misrepresent populations, and if not accounted for, can exacerbate already existing social inequalities by poor allocation of resources. And that companies that purchase geospatial data from actors in authoritarian states with oppressive collection practices call into question the ethics of utilizing said data, as the purchase and collaboration across these bodies can inadvertently support the practices of the oppressive states. So conclusions, taking all of these aforementioned considerations at the forefront, GeoAI will fundamentally transform both the way geospatial data is identified, collected, stored, and processed, alongside the responsibilities and skills necessary for the workforce tasked with its implementation. This transition will be facilitated through collaboration from the public and private sector with colleges, universities, and public education to promote STEM development programs and new curriculum. Federal programs indicate preparation for a field in which geospatial data is blended across a variety of separate disciplines through the implementation of new systems of AI, in addition to the creation of new GeoAI programs between the intelligence community and armed forces. The rise of commercial GeoN and remote sensing capabilities will be influential, as the private sector will continue to develop GeoAI systems geared towards automating the analysis of geospatial data in support of national security missions. As international GeoAI competition increases, the United States must deal with the rise of new competitors and carefully weigh whether relaxing regulations to promote growth in the private sector could potentially put national security at risk. However, growth must also be accomplished with respect for individual liberties and human rights as a chief concern, and combating inherent biases in data collection and processing will be essential to ensuring GeoAI is implemented in a fair and equitable manner. Federal and state regulation of geospatial capabilities will play a substantial role in determining how the future of GeoAI is shaped, as geospatial data faces very different regulatory considerations depending on the institution which collects the data and the purpose for which the data will be used for. And finally, big data and readily available geospatial information is increasingly intertwining the lives of private citizens with GeoAI programs and matters of national security. Therefore, an increased emphasis on the protection of the privacy and safety of surveilled populations could be a primary goal in the adoption of new regulations. That is my report on geospatial artificial intelligence capabilities legislation, ethical considerations, and I'd like to thank you all for your time today. Go Hokies.